Hey everybody, it's Tuesday and we're in between two women talkings. So I am talking about Assassin's Creed Shadows, which I am playing right now. And I have been very surprised at some of the chatter about it. Now, I know that some of the opinions that have become somewhat mainstream online have not been done in good faith. They're done as an attempt to financially damage Ubisoft as a protest against DEI and woke games. I don't think it's going to be successful. This feels to me like Hogwarts Legacy all over again. And those of you who may not have been around for that or were around and maybe have forgotten, I got canceled over Hogwarts Legacy because I objected to some of the tactics being used to protest that game. And I did that because, one, I thought they were wrong. I don't care who does it. I think there are some things that are just not okay. But also, I had a feeling this would happen. And now I'm like the only person out there who can say, nope, didn't like when you did it with Hogwarts Legacy, don't like it now. I am consistent. So if you like this content, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. Sign up yourself if you'd like to do some peer counseling, or artist management, or anything like that. How to start a YouTube channel and have people yell at you over stuff like this. And yes, the microphone is farther away from me. I apologize if this audio is roomy. There was like 2 minutes of crackle on a half-hour video yesterday, and I have no idea where the hell it's coming from. I've made sure there's no interference with the wire, though I'm noticing that my earbud headphones are crossing with it. Maybe I'll get rid of that. There we go. But I have it way out here so they don't bump it. So if it's echoey, that's why. I'm not just being lazy with the audio. I do this by myself and there's a time crunch. So the three main buckets of criticism against Assassin's Creed Shadows that I've seen. I haven't seen bad writing yet, though. Anyway, the three main buckets of criticism I've seen with this game are that it's woke, that it's too much like Ghost of Tsushima, and that Ubisoft engages in corrupt business practices so people just don't trust the company. I'm going to start with the Ghost of Tsushima comparisons first because it's probably the easiest to actually have granular, objective data about. It's also the one I'm most scared to talk about because there have been a lot of medieval fantasy games featuring white dudes, slightly older white dudes, often with white hair, and we don't see, oh, Neo's ripping off The Witcher or something like that, right? I don't like the culture war that Ghost of Tsushima landed in, because I was one of the unpopular people that preferred Ghost of Tsushima to The Last of Us 2. And in case you don't believe me that I'm like a Ghost of Tsushima super fan, I'm trying to find my steel case. Damn it, it's not here. I bought the steel case for Ghost of Tsushima. I thought it was here. But yeah, I'm a mega fan. I knew I was going to love that game. I was not wrong. I bought it for people. I'm a big fan of Ghost of Tsushima. Played the shit out of that game. It's only got a passing cosmetic resemblance to Assassin's Creed Shadows, or vice versa. One, Ghost of Tsushima is inspired by Kurosawa films, meaning it's set in 1274, the the Mongol invasion of Tsushima Island, but there's a ton of historical anachronisms. The reason that certain elements like clothing in Ghost of Tsushima look similar to Assassin's Creed Shadows is not that Assassin's Creed Shadows is copying Ghost of Tsushima. It's that Ghost of Tsushima is using Kurosawa aesthetic, not what the clothes were in history. So you can't put an unnecessarily rigid stricture on what games people can make just because it's set in a non-Western culture. That's not fair. It's anti-creativity. It's forcing your sense of what's normal or centered on games. And when Ghost of Tsushima came out, there were people insisting that that game was offensive to the Japanese. And of course, the Tourism Bureau of like Tsushima Island made the developers ambassadors, and that ended that. But there were people going, this is a terrible game. This isn't accurate to samurai and all that stuff. And of course, that was people salty because they liked The Last of Us 2. And Ghost of Tsushima had more fan goodwill behind it. And so they were trying to find everything wrong with the game. And that's what's so ironic now, is it's just happening again. Comparing Assassin's Creed Shadows to Ghost of Tsushima is like comparing Fable to The Witcher. In terms of tone, in terms of what it's trying to do. Yes, okay, they're both, The Witcher and Fable are both sort of medievalist fantasy stuff, but they're very different games. And even the type of game that AC Shadows is not the same as Tsushima. The control schematics aren't the same. The main combat buttons are up here. On AC Shadows, they're here and here. Now, this in Tsushima are your projectiles, right? This is your block, this is your tool wheel. These two are your primary attacks on AC Shadows. Tsushima, the primary attacks were the buttons, the surface buttons. So doesn't play the same. And the optional RPG elements in AC Shadows also set it apart from Tsushima. They were trying with Assassin's Creed to make different settings. So if people picked up on the franchise during the sort of Odyssey Valhalla era, they could have that experience. If you wanted more of the old school synchronized with history, you can do, I forget what it is, but it's basically, you don't make the RPG choices. And some of the RPG choices are kind of neat. They're interesting moments, like picking out fabric for Naoi's dress, stuff like that. But AC Shadows is going for as sort of photorealistic a look as you can with the hardware limitations of the PS5. The PS5 is a powerful console, but it's still a console, right? Whereas Ghost of Tsushima was old on the PS4. That engine was pretty dated, and so they used a very painted look for Ghost of Tsushima. And it's a beautiful game, but it's highly, highly stylized. Hence my comparisons between The Witcher and Fable, right? Just because it's set in Japan and not even the same part of Japan. One could argue Tsushima is actually in Korea. Like, we gotta watch that. And you gotta not let your emotions run so wild that you're comparing two different geographic locations 300 years apart with different art styles just because it has pagodas. I don't even remember if Tsushima had pagodas, because those pagodas were built during the period in AC Shadows that Japanese history was just coming out of. AC Shadows is centered around a very specific part of history. The game starts in 1579, and features very prominently around things that happen in Japanese history in 1582. And it does it in a pretty clever way. In Assassin's Creed fashion, it sort of doesn't violate what's known about history from that event, but it uses the stuff that people don't know for sure about it to tell a story. It's so accurate to history that the Jesuit that brought Yasuke as a slave to Japan is named. A particular character shows up, and I mean, it's sort of hard to spoil the events of AC Shadows because it's based on history, at least to a certain point. But it's like, oh, I know what's going to happen now. That's a big name from history. And another big name from history that is, they run into each other. I see where this is going. And even Jin from Ghost of Tsushima and Naoe are very different characters. And he's setting Yasuke aside for a second because he's not the main character for the sort of tutorial, and he's there, playable, but then you switch to Naoe's point of view until you get to that point of history that is an OMG and they meet. But she is a very different character than Jin. And the fact that they're both sort of revenge protagonists can make it seem like they're more similar as characters than they are. But Jin is much more driven by kind of honor in Kurosawa fashion. Naoi's just traumatized. Like, that girl has a really neat manic trauma energy. Like, she's not okay. When she tries to smile, it's like, hey, really well acted, especially since it's like mocap and they had to do it in multiple languages. I'm playing it in immersive mode, which means you get the Japanese and Portuguese instead of English. I don't know if it changes the dialogue. To me, it is the way to play Assassin's Creed Shadows. I mentioned this last week. But it's really not fair to go all in on, oh, there's too much Kurosawa in it, because they use little moments for like super attacks. There are these special moves that you can use once you build a meter off the R2, I believe. But they're little moments. And the thing about Kurosawa in his day was he was criticized for being too Western in terms of his filmmaking traditions. And so the interplay of, Western films, like Westerns, like The Magnificent Seven, the interplay between those films, Kurosawa films like Seven Samurai, and then back into stuff like Star Wars, this idea that you can avoid the influence of Kurosawa or being evocative of Kurosawa. Alfred Hitchcock used similar filmmaking techniques in some ways. So to try to avoid that, you just lose too much, especially when you're telling a story set in Japan. He just looms so large that I think it's unfair for there to be one game that can be inspired by Kurosawa filmmaking, as opposed to all of the myriad games that have been inspired by Star Wars and The Lord of the Rings. We'll see if that crackles now. I just bumped it. But again, really, really influential Western media. People don't super complain about the similarities to a whole bunch of, anything that sort of came through D&D. So we're talking like Dragon Age, Baldur's Gate, obviously, anything where there are like sort of elves, humans, dwarves, and other things. We don't complain, oh, there's too much Tolkien fantasy. In fact, there are some people who believe that you can't get away from Tolkien in fantasy, which disadvantages non-Western creators and non-Western aesthetics, because Lord of the Rings is so dominant. And this fight over Kurosawa may be proving its point. But there's more to Asian filmmaking than Kurosawa. And I would argue that AC Shadows, except for those little moves, borrows much more from wuxia filmmaking. So it's almost more of like a Hong Kong Chinese deal with, as I call it, the flippy, stabby, stabby, than traditional Kurosawa, which was more still and on the ground, just they hadn't developed the technology yet, right? But obviously, Kurosawa is an incredibly influential filmmaker, and you can argue that stuff like Mass Effect has a lot to thank from him, because Mass Effect clearly borrowed from Star Wars, and Star Wars borrowed from Kurosawa. And that's good. But if we put, again, an unfair standard on Asian aesthetics that aren't anime, we're choking off anything about Asian history for fear of landing on something that somebody's going to say, oh, that's Kurosawa. If it's made by Westerners, there's a very large likelihood that it seems like that because he used Western filmmaking techniques. That makes sense. I'm going to move on from there because I know that's one that people will fight until the cows come home and use like confirmation bias anecdotal examples taken from YouTube videos that show snippets. Like, oh, I watched 15 minutes of a 60 fucking hour game. Yeah, I got a representative sample. No, you didn't. And that's why I'm saying people are actively being lied to here, both by people who don't want the game to sell well. That horse is out of the barn. But also from, games journalists seeking relevance, and they know that's going to hit. So let's move on to, and there's a whole bunch of other things that you could claim are not similar. You can't pet wild animals in AC Shadows. So the pet the fox versus petting a fox, which is a kitsune, which is a spiritual creature, versus petting cats and dogs, not the same. You can get things like macaques for your hideout to customize, but they're just there. They're really going for I'll say verite as opposed to realistic with Assassin's Creed. And I think much like Kurosawa borrowed from Westerns and then the West borrowed from Kurosawa through sci-fi, there's a certain amount of Assassin's Creed is so influential regarding third-person action gameplay. There is a lot in Ghost of Tsushima that, pardon the pun, has the DNA of Assassin's Creed, because it's sword melee combat that's kind of exciting. To me, AC Shadows plays more like AC Mirage than Ghost of Tsushima. And I have played the game. So, and obviously that's just with Naoe. Yasuke plays totally differently. If I reach a point in the game where my opinion changes on this, I will do an update. I'm just doing this now because I'm at the point where I've got the Tanto and I call it the spinny bonky or bonky hacky. Forget the name. It's a ball and a scythe and it's brutal. But I have abandoned the katana completely in my playstyle, except for rare occasions where it's like, oh, I'll put it back for good times. Cause I want a different experience, and you can have it. There's so much customization that you can do in the Assassin's Creed Shadows, everything. That if you want an experience that's more like Ghost of Tsushima, go for it, but I wouldn't say that's the default. Are there similar character tropes? Sure, but tropes are tools. It's almost impossible to not land on something just because so much of those samurai films were borrowed from a mythologized Japanese history. Correlation is not causation. So this brings me into the it's woke part. We're on this issue where some people believe that a nuanced depiction of history somehow has an agenda other than history is cool and messy and we like it. And I am very hesitant to add to that. One of the things that I find really interesting in Assassin's Creed Shadows is for many, many hours of gameplay, you don't really have a choice but to kill unarmed servants, which is not woke, right? It works, though. Not only because of, the cultural norms of the time, but Naoe, again, is fucked up. And her attitude is, well, why should they be spared? Their masters didn't spare my people. And so not only is it an interesting little nod to the time period where they chose realism over some sort of pandering to the more lefty game critics who think just because you can do something in a game, the game is telling you that it's a good or noble thing. So that's an anti-woke point for the game. I also think that the nuanced depiction of Naoe really does supersede the whole wokeness thing. One, you can play her the way you want to play her if you're doing the more RPG features. So if you want her to basically be a psycho killer out for revenge, you can play her that way. If you want to play her more demure and sort of engaging in face, you can play it that way as well. The game's not telling you one way or another what kind of experience you're allowed to have, which is, again, normally what would be considered anti-woke, right? Whatever that means, ask 4 people, you will get 5 opinions on the definition of woke. The only thing I can think of, the only thing I've seen that people are going, it's woke, it's woke, it's woke, it's woke, is Naoe doesn't have boobs the size of Eve's in Stellar Blade. And they're completely different games. Naoe wouldn't be able to do a lot of the moves she does. Eve's an android. I can't do the crawly like this. Certain things get in the way. And I get a little annoyed as somebody who's pretty well endowed, and I did modeling when I was younger. The fact that is the only thing that matters, that this is the hill these guys are dying on, indicates to me that it's not in good faith. That if you can't enjoy a game unless there's a character with massive boobs, you are not seeing women built like me as people, and we have a problem. We are now objects that indicate, yes, massa, we serve you, right? Instead of, oh, that's an attractive person. You've turned someone into a symbol for something political instead of just going, does the way Eve looks make sense in Stellar Blade? Yes, it does, as somebody who's played Stellar Blade. Does Naoe's appearance make sense in she's a Japanese peasant? Does she look like a Japanese peasant? Yes, you might actually argue she's a little too pretty after that beating she took to her face. So, you can't compare a sci-fi game where a character is an android intended to sort of be hyper beautiful and hyper sexualized and hyper feminine, as opposed to a game that's supposed to be normal girl McNormal pants. They're just not the same thing. One is not better or worse. And in order to not have an ideological bent here, you have to say neither is better nor worse. They are aesthetically different, and it's just a matter of personal preference. To hang your entire accusations of woke on a game because there is one whole black man in it and an Asian girl that doesn't look like an anime character, that to me is an incredibly weak argument. You're confusing aesthetic choices made versus moral choices made. And I mean, the use of Yasuki was exactly what I expected it to be. It's gameplay symbolism. He can't hide the way she can. He can't climb the way she can. He can bonk people on the beans in a way that she can't, right? It's not just look. It's a historical figure that happened to exist in a very complicated period of history, kind of like Neo, and people didn't have a problem with them. People, but, like, okay, so White Samurai, okay, even though he was a landowner and they threw his kids out. I forget William Adams, I think that character's name was. But, and, the depiction of Yasuke is in that game too. But people are like, oh, that's fine. It's too much of a stretch. I reject, on its face, accusations of wokeness in this title, just because too many of the examples are an indication of the political bias of the people making the claim, not an examination of what's going on in the game. I do think the fact that you can just kill unarmed women in AC Shadows, and it's brutal. Like, they scream and it's rough. That's not a game telling you what to think and that it's bad and that you should always put women up on pedestals and all that stuff, right? Like, that's a form of sexism in itself. But that alone says a lot about they were going for kind of immersiveness. And I think immersiveness might be a better word than realism there. So, I think the claims of wokeness are weaker than the comparisons to Kurosawa films, because I kind of see I see where the Kurosawa comparisons are coming from. That's more nuanced. That's why I started with that. And let's move on to the corrupt business practices now, because this is an interesting one. Because I'm hearing this from people who I know are well-meaning. So some of the bad shit has trickled down from the truly bad actors to people that have just been persuaded. And there's two ways we can judge anyone. Judging them against a perfected ideal, or judging them against kind of reasonable standards based on peers and a whole bunch of other factors. And if you're gonna judge for-profit companies based on a perfected ideal, every single one of them is gonna lose. You can never buy another game again. Someone, somewhere, on a given game dev team will not live up to your standards. It's an impossible standard. Now, by the standards of the industry, which we can argue aren't great, right? But they're not great in indie as well as not great in AAA. I would argue there's in some ways more abuse of staff in the indie space than in AAA. And so on the staff side, people keep saying Ubisoft mistreats its staff. And I keep asking people to name me an example of this. And they can't. They can't. They're still going off vibes from that sexual harassment scandal years back. And I remember when that happened, and I said at the time, because I knew I'd experienced poor treatment from other places. I witnessed things at Ubisoft parties that were wild, and I thought at the time, this is probably going to get them into trouble someday. But it didn't feel like putting me in my place the way the treatment from, say, EA or Activision was. And sure enough, that massive Activision, class action suit came out. And the problem is we all sort of know EA is not great. And so we don't apply kind of an industry baseline to these sorts of judgments. And it's easy to say, AAA game dev, bad business practices. But that discounts the people who go to work every day to make games that people like. And you may be bored of AAA games. I play fewer and fewer AAA games. Assassin's Creed is one of the few AAA franchises I have not dropped. I hear that. That being said, there is a market for these sorts of games. And if you don't like them, cool. Don't play them. But again, that is a personal preference, not a moral stance. And that's fine. I would rather this stay personal preference as opposed to a moral stance. But when you look at treatment of staff, Ubisoft didn't have mass layoffs. They laid off some people, but nowhere near the numbers of the other majors post-COVID. There's a lot greater employee retention. It's not uncommon for people to have been there 5 years. Now, does that mean every employee at Ubisoft has a stellar experience? No, it absolutely matters what location you're at, who you've got as a manager, what project you're working on. All experiences are not equal. I know people who have worked for Ubisoft that have wonderful experiences. I know people who worked for Ubisoft who have had terrible experiences. It seems like if you're more of a artist or a coder, you have a better experience. If you're a writer, you have a less good experience. But writers getting treated like shit is something entertainment industry wide. I say this as a writer. And I lump narrative designers into that too, though it's not the same gig. By the standards of the industry, I cannot say Ubisoft treats people uniquely badly. Now, game dev's tough no matter where you work, but not only is the treatment of people on staff better, Ubisoft might ghost me. Ubisoft might cut me from their PR lists, but they didn't go out of their way to humiliate me the way people at EA and Activision did. Just saying. And it's funny, how 2 weeks changes. People were like, Nintendo's kept their nose clean, and now we have the pricing brouhaha about the Switch 2. So, and that's the other thing, this idea that a cosmetics store is somehow unethical. That's a stretch. So all of Fortnite's financial model is unethical. Uh, a friend of mine is also playing AC Shadows. She's a much different type of player than I am. It's very hard for us to find games we both like. She's big into stuff like Destiny, and so she's used to more of that games as live service thing. And the attitude from those players is, you pay money for cosmetics because you understand that they put in a lot of content and you like it. So you put in money and it's a little bit of happy, and that's good. You're not forced to. It's not like, you remember, was it Dead Space 3? Where the store was just really in your face? I remember one of the Dead Space games, and Mortal Kombat, I stopped playing because the goddamn in-game purchases were so in your face. So I'm someone who's bothered by this. The store is buried like 4 or 5 menus deep in AC Shadows. And it's a currency you can earn by doing those sort of weekly challenge type things. You can earn enough to buy the cool mounts and everything like that. But if you don't want to grind, you can pay money too. They're just cosmetic. Who gives a shit? I think some of the talismans or something like that, they have in-game effects, but they're not so overpowered that they're really going to affect your gameplay that much. It's not that hard a game. If I were to say it's sort of on the easy side, but I'm not typical. I mean, if you've played Sekiro, the parrying is going to be nothing for you on AC Shadows. But in-app purchases so the company can make more money is an alternative to a just straight up price hike. Because these things are expensive. They're expensive to make. They're expensive to market. And there are no guarantees. No brand is a guarantee. No type of game is a guarantee anymore. And it's not a, pay to win live service game. It's at its core, it's a single player experience. And in a company like Ubisoft, now it's split, like the big franchises are split from the smaller things. It'll be interesting to see what happens to those smaller IPs. But a game like Assassin's Creed Shadows finances other games. It's going to make up some of those losses from Outlaws. Which would you want? A game making a bunch of money on cosmetics so that a person who worked hard on a game that was badly marketed, like Outlaws was, do you want that person to lose their job through no fault of their own because a game was badly marketed? That game just wasn't marketed. What you get in that game and what was marketed in that game are not the same game. And releasing that footage when it wasn't cleaned up was just stupid. And I'm not sure what happened there. But yeah, that was a marketing debacle. But that's not the fault of the individual workers on the game. So the choice is have that money so when a game hits, it really hits and more money flows so that, you can have those retentive business practices. Or, studios get shuttered after 1 or 2 missteps, which, BioWare's on the bubble now. We're probably not going to get more Dragon Age where, Mass Effect is make or break. And I'll remind everybody that EA was the reason that the Dragon Age franchise got so screwed up. They only gave them 18 months to make Dragon Age 2. And it's just been a domino effect ever since. They have finally got the narrative to a place where they can, somebody told me once they got screwed up to Dragon Age 7 in terms of story plotting with Dragon Age 2. But it seems like they're finally in a point where they can start clean with a new story next time. And there might not be another one. Because, you know, they had to they had 2 false starts. They were never going to make their money back. And EA, instead of going, yeah, we don't need you to make your money back. What we need you to do is, you know, recover the goodwill for this franchise. So don't worry about profits. Just make sure the people who play the game like the game and let it spread. That's not what EA did. They cut bait way too early. And I think it's because there were too many people at that company who were just all in on live service. Okay, if you want those sort of executives to be the ones whose opinions dominate in gaming, keep attacking games like Assassin's Creed Shadows because somebody told you to still be salty that a woman who plays a smuggler in a 70s aesthetic Star Wars game had a jaw that offended you. A jawline that offended you. Okay. That's a choice, right? I can't stop people from making it. But again, do you want female characters to be characters? Which means they're not all going to be drop dead gorgeous, because sometimes that's... And looks are subjective anyway, right? But they're not all going to look like anime characters, because that's not appropriate for every story. Do you want female characters to be characters with some artistic vision and cohesion? Or do you want every game to soothe your personal politics and sense that you are centered and safe and protected in a giant industry with a massive amount out there to play? What are you really saying here? Are you saying that you don't care about any other type of character, any other type of player? Every game has to just be for you or you're going to freak out. Gee, who does that sound like, right? That sounds like the people we didn't like back in 2014 that were going on about women as background decoration and shit like that, strategic butt coverings. Like, that's what they did, okay? Or are we gonna go, like, look, I don't care for the art styles in certain games. I'm trying to think of one. There was one, I was really put off by Night in the Woods. Couldn't stand that art style. Other people loved it, right? Don't terribly love the look of Grand Theft Auto games. Am I saying there's something morally wrong with the art style? No, I just don't like it, you know? Do I get bored with the anime aesthetic? Yeah, I can't play too many games like that. That's part of the reason I avoided Trails in the Sky for so long. Is like, anime. I didn't say I don't like the anime look. I just need to change it up. And the people that are really, really attacking AC Shadows, they're the ones that want everything to look in this very narrow aesthetic because massive boobs mean for them. Here's the problem with that thinking, outside of the fact that it's really narrow and not letting other people have other aesthetics and other things they like. I mean, what if people like long legs or big asses? What if people like thick legs? You can't have a character with long supermodel legs and thick legs at the same time. You gotta have both for both type of people because everybody gets to have something they like, right? But here's the problem with give me boobies and I won't freak out. There's telling bad actors how to manipulate you. You know, there were even parts playing Stellar Blade that I couldn't tell whether they were shamelessly pandering and then pulling a bait and switch on the plot, or they were doing more of a nuanced Kojima style, let's encourage the player to kind of objectify these characters based on a characteristic that we're going to name them: quiet, fragile, that kind of stuff, big boss. But again, Kojima didn't he didn't create that technique. He just popularized it. He's very, very good at it. But, you know, the way Eve is treated in Stellar Blade does sort of have this element of sleaze, and the human race is not in a great place in that game. And much like games like Nier, who it's commentary on the fact that these robots are, you know, objectified and somewhat not seen as truly alive by their human creators. That really seems to get missed when you're doing a side-by-side comparison of Eve from Stellar Blade and Naoe from AC Shadows. And part of me gets the sense that Shift Up is like, we don't care. We got those morons' money. So if you want to be taken advantage of, keep falling for this shit. If you don't, I'd like to roll back the clock like 15 years when people were like, we just want games that are fun to play. And at the end of the day, Ghost of Tsushima was really fun to play. Assassin's Creed Shadows is really fun to play. No, it is. The cutscenes are sometimes way too long for me, but they're fun to play. They are fun. The gameplay is really good. Like, if you liked Mirage, the gameplay is... The sword combat feels more fluid than Mirage, but there are reasons for that based on the characters. But it's an interesting story. Naomi's a really, really cool character that feels like they thought about her personality based on her backstory. And that's what really matters. None of these man jaw and small boobs nonsense. That's not important. It really isn't. Bringing in as many people as we possibly can so we can get more players and start the growth up again instead of prices going up. One, that's important. Two, the games actually being fun and good value for money instead of a panderfest. That's important too. So this is why I made this video, because I'm trying to peel back who I can. Because the whole Veilguard debate really, I felt, was dishonest. People were judging, again, dozens of hours of gameplay by very specifically selected cutscenes that didn't give an accurate picture, in my opinion. And unfortunately, you know, I need a whole team of people to actually break it down, and I don't have that. But I think, you know, because I've put it on the line when it was unpopular the other way, hopefully at least a few people will believe me on this one. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.